Peace and power. Once again, it's the Panther 48, brother Robert Ward Williams, brother E, and myself, brother Psyche. Today's discussion is going to be the feasibility of an equal but separate territory in the United States of America. We're going to kick it off and we're going to let brother Ward give you a breakdown and explanation of what we mean by that.
All right. First, I want to start off when I think about this, dealing with just, some basic parameters. And in doing so, I like to go into the aspect of what feasibility is, because I think it's super important that we address things from the stance of making sure we all have the same groundwork. So in the corporate world, you are projecting a project or getting ready to spend money on a project, that everything that you're jumping into, the idea makes sense, and the idea is going to actually be practical for the corporation. So in looking into that, what must be dealt with when you talk about the feasibility is you got to make sure that you thoroughly understand all aspects of what it means to run a government, because in this scenario, what we're talking about is a separate but equal territory. So part of the feasibility has to do with understanding thoroughly all aspects of running a government, the conception phases necessary to employ the transition from current assimilation that we live in right now to nationhood, the land resource based on how it will be obtained, which is obviously to me, one of the biggest and super most important aspects, because when we talk about feasibility of separate but equal, how are we going to get the land? It's one thing to talk about being separate, but it's another thing to actually establish the area in which that to take place. Then you have to think about the initial mechanism structure that's going to be needed to achieve each milestone of the development. You have to talk about now the initial resources needed to achieve each milestone and a budget to implement each phase of development. Then you have to get into the projected risk factors that each phase must be addressed and the potential problems that could occur while implementing each phase. When you go into a risk into a feasibility study from that, now you also got to deal with the risk. So there has to be a actual risk assessment done in a specific body that's able to deal with each one of those risks that have come up as it applies to this feasibility. And this, as always, be calibrated throughout the actual phases of the planning that you're dealing with. And then ultimately, you got to deal with whether or not all of these factors can take place and happen in a position to where this can actually make sense. So this can actually reach the people and bring the people to a position of the empowerment that you're seeking when it applies to establishing your own territory. So from that standpoint, the feasibility aspect is supposed to take place by some type of body or governing position of people that plan to make this all happen. And as you develop each one of those phases in terms of the feasibility, we're talking about right now, we're just simply talking about making sure that it even makes sense to even engage into this. So as you engage into this, and the body that engages into this has to basically break down ahead of time all aspects of how you want to deal with this. So the feasibility of it itself goes into a lot of head work, a lot of room just dealing with making sure that it even is accountable and makes sense. And that same body is the same body that should be dealing with the actual development the whole way along. So feasibility of actual separate territory, to me, never left the blueprint. And from that standpoint, when you look back in history, there's a lot of examples that we started off with. I would even go as far as obviously saying the Garvey movement that initially went into the feasibility, but as people got on board and worked on and developed it, then it started splintering between different groups that felt like well, it needs to have this particular spinoff or that spinoff, or ultimately, where are we going to end up when we develop it? One of the good examples I like to think about is the Republic of New Africa, because to me, they made the most, I would say the most noise on the situation. And that had a lot to do with the people that was involved in it. But from that standpoint, the feasibility and the approach is what I say we need to get into. So when I think of that, let's basically go back to what happened with the Nation of Islam in their initial beginnings, in talking about developing powerful for people. And then even with that being said, obviously the Black Panther Party, point number 10, within that, we wanted a separate nation state or plebiscite to where we could practice self-determination. And you had the same concept for the most part within the Nation of Islam's platform. So I say, let's go jump into that and talk about, from a feasibility standpoint, is that practical? What happens with that? E, what do you think?
If you're talking about feasibility on an infinite timeline, yeah, obviously, eventually, yeah. Anytime within the next 100 years, nah. African people in this country don't have the wherewithal to address their basic needs without running to a greater, higher authority as a group, as a mass. I'm not talking about a couple of individuals. I'm not talking about a couple of groups. A couple of groups ain't gonna get it. It's just not gonna get it. It's gonna have to be a mass of people. And the masses of the people, as Ice Cube talked about 30 damn years ago, are still more concerned about hairstyles and tennis shoes. That's just a fact. The few dwindling numbers of people that even think about this type of thing is getting smaller and smaller generationally. So if we follow that timeline, remember Garvey had hundreds, thousands, he had people around the world. This was a global movement. You move forward to the Nation of Islam. It's big, had some people around the world, quite a few numbers of people in Malcolm's day and all of that, but smaller than what Garvey had. The Panther Party, even smaller, still a global presence, folks here and there, even to this day, but it's much smaller. And along with that, the understanding, you had regular cats in the street in Garvey's day who had a social awareness, who had a cultural awareness, who had some type of political awareness about the importance of all of these basic things that go into all of this long prior to establishing any type of nation. The call for nationhood for African folk in this country in Garvey's day was like, well, duh, even back before Garvey's day, you go back to Martin Delany when it actually Liberia and the establishment of that nation state, essentially to some degree, in some sense, a failed state, but whatever. So not only are the numbers getting smaller, but the ability to even process the fundamentals of even having a fucking conversation with folk from Africa on a one-on-one basis is going out the door. Our people are more and more emotional and less able to process what it takes to even have, as I said, a fundamental conversation with somebody who disagrees with somebody from the continent who disagrees with a particular position. So anytime soon, no. Anytime in the near, short, long term, no. Eventually, yeah, because all things return home. So it's something that would naturally have to happen. But in anything feasibility in terms of any type of the next couple of generations, nah, I don't see it happen. There's no mass support for even the most basic, even all the stuff that you just ran down just flew over 95% of the people's heads, more than that, and have no concept of the necessity, the need, the possible need, the pluses, the minus, any of that. Don't even want to have that conversation. So no, absolutely not.
Well, I'm gonna add to that. That's essentially my answer. No, I don't see the feasibility of it, and not just because of the consciousness of the people, but we have to understand that no people in power ever gives away their power just because it's the right thing to do. Nobody ever done that in history. You know what? We are wrong these people. Let's give them some land and let them start their own nation. Nobody does that. I mean, look at the America intentionally. I mean, all governments do to the degree that they had a power to do it. So I'm not even gonna just limit it to America, but America intentionally destabilizes other countries to make sure that they don't get to the level of power that they're at, so that they could compete with them equally on the world market. They intentionally does that. Look at Cuba. Since Cuba didn't want to play by America's rules, America intentionally destabilized Cuba with trade embargoes and things of that nature, just to make, because Cuba is too close to America, just to make sure that Cuba never came into any true and real economic power. This is done intentionally to even Barack Obama, uh, Brother E's last president. Uh, Even he talked about in his book Dreams from My Father, when he explained and broke down how America intentionally destabilizes other nations. So therefore, you would have to understand that there would be no way that this country would ever give a land or give a piece of this land to its ex-slaves. That would never happen. That has never happened in the history of the world. It will not happen. And as East talked about the consciousness level of the people, to have something like that, the people would actually have to see a need to have their own nation. The people would have to be militarily equipped and prepared to fight for their own nation. And the people are not simply not there. And I don't have the vision to see 100 years as E did, so I don't see it at all in no way possible.
Well, let me add this to what when I think about it. Also, is first we started off talking about the feasibility, and y'all addressing it from the standpoint of where we stand now in terms of feasibility, and even said potentially projecting. Now we have to talk about the concept of separation, because to me, when you think about why this was even necessary, we have to go into why is separation necessary. So when this concept of a separate territory or equal but separate territory even came into play, we were talking about a point in time to where our people were forced to be segregated anyway within a society. So at that point, we basically were xed out of the American dream as it applies. We were xed out of the position of being able to participate in the development or taking credit for the development of the United States. So from that standpoint, our communities, our Black people, basically had to live within our own segments. Living within our own segments mean that we were already addressing things from the standpoint of being separated. We were already in positions to where we had to build up our own communities. We were already in positions where we had to do everything that it took for us to educate our children, develop our own wherever land we had or whatever positions of power we had to develop them within our own pockets, because we were not allowed to participate in the vast European experience. So when you think about that, and you think about the feasibility of it becoming a nation state, so to speak, or territory, everything that we had then, it had to do with us operating as a collective anyway. The only difference was us having an official land base to where we can practice self-determination as a people. But kind of going back to what Brother E said, over time, especially through the concepts of assimilation, and what happened is when we basically asked for equality, so to speak, or we fought for equality, that equality basically meant assimilation. As we assimilated, the separation aspect and the territory aspect basically kind of like went out the door with one another, because now all of a sudden the grouping of us of African people here that allowed us to have some sort of power, because we had power in our operation, power in our numbers, power within our community, because we had to depend completely on ourselves in order to develop anything. And when we asked for equality and we sort of asked for separation at that point, we actually removed the borders of separation. Then at that point, how can you ask for a territory if you basically allowed yourself or ask for a simulation at the same time. So now it does seem to be something that is just far from the horizon, unless I say our people get put back in a position of separation, or should I say segregation? Because separation, when I think of that, is where we actually plan and project to be separate or away from other groups so that we can develop ourselves, whereas segregation is where we're forced to. So we were forced as a people to be separate. And through that, it caused us to have to work more so in unison with whatever development and build that we needed to do. So at this point in time, maybe it's going to take that same level of segregation in order to force our people to think more back toward developing ourselves. And as we do that, even when I think back on when I'm talking about the feasibility, part of the feasibility, again, is how do you acquire that land? So it's not that we're saying that we could escape bloodshed to do it, but how feasible is it for us to be able to engage in a confrontation for a position of power to acquire land? How do we go about whatever measures it takes for us to achieve and get our own land? So to me, when I talk about feasibility, that does play a factor or play a role. Now, when we were dealing with a population to where we were segregated to a point of where we had pockets of empowerment, it may have been to some degree feasible that we could, or we felt we could fight that fight. But when you deal with an assimilated population, how do you go about that? This is also why oftentimes in our plight for dealing with a separate nation territory, we would try to go before the UN or go before some external body to try to seek support. So from that standpoint, that's what we got to talk about. I think we're living in a different day and time to where through assimilation, less and less of us can even fathom the concept of a separate nation state. But there are obviously, it's still written within our platform, and it's still part of, I would say, the carrot on the stick that we use to push ourselves to a position of self-determination. So in addressing it from that standpoint, where do we go if we're not looking at the platform from point number one, dealing with we want freedom, to point number 10, saying how do we exercise that ability to practice self-determination?
Well, I think in regards to the topic, that this is something that we have to look at, and it goes back to something that you were saying about Black people being in a situation where they were segregated, and then they saw the need for possibly separating themselves from a society that was so abusive and oppressive. Well, as revolutionaries, the first thing a revolutionary has to understand is that the revolutionary does not make revolution. The people make revolution. So the people has to come into a level of awareness for whatever changes needs to be made for the people. And the revolutionary is the one who has the ability to make a scientific analysis of the situation and create concrete plans for bringing about a revolution. So the revolutionary's job is simply to guide the people along the choice of revolution that they've already decided to make. Now, one of the things we have to look at is the reason why you said what you said, because people, for the most part, only make changes along the margin, which essentially means people do not jump, take an evolutionary leap from A to Z. It does not happen. People make changes along the margin. They make minor changes as the need is required. If you look at no creature in the history of mankind has ever made an evolutionary change without it being a change that was necessary for the survival of that creature. And so, and it goes, and this is why when it goes to E talking about hairstyles and tennis shoes, the people do not have to make a change so vast that they need their own nation for basic general survival. And see, sociologists study this, they understand this. Economists study this and they understand this. And they understand how to basically make tweaks to the way society is operating to make sure that those large extreme changes are not made. The people would never make such a large change like that without it being a requirement for survival. And it's no longer a requirement for survival. That's one of the major reasons why the separate nation state is not feasible now, because it's not actually necessary for survival. Now there are a small group of revolutionary minded individuals that see the logic in it, that understand that any group of people on the planet need their own nation and their own land in order to truly have power. But the people themselves will not see it, because right now the people's basic survival is not threatened.
And we have to understand, we've never been separate in this country. We've never been, separation has never been part of our reality. It's always been segregation, from the standpoint that segregation is about them controlling us while we're over in a pocket. Separation would be us being separate. If we were separate, we would really need to have this conversation. But every time we've been quote unquote separated, it's always been from a position of someone else controlling our reality. We've been in existence at someone else's behest. And that brings up the point of, even when we had and were doing things in our own community, we weren't able to hold on to them because we had no capacity to protect what it is we had, period. So when they decided, okay, no more of this bullshit that y'all are doing, they came in and just took it back. So, you know, we've never, I would say since slave days, so-called slave days, had that thrust to even defend ourselves. So that basic instinct has been taken away years ago from us, even in a communal sense, and even in a communal sense, because when we've had something, someone has fairly easily walked in and taken it over, and they would do the same at this point. So to the question of it being on the platform and and these things, there are things that are necessary to call out as a wish list, as an eventuality, but to actually put energy and time into it, to me at this point, is a waste of time. You know, you prep people so that when other things happen in this country, in this world, when things take place, we're in a position to step in and assume those roles, so that we can have what you like to talk about, the continuance of. We prepare people to have that continuance and have that idea that, yes, one day we're going to have our own separate whatever. But in the meantime, we're not even really have a class about it, make sure people are prepped about it, understand, okay, this is an eventuality, but we're not going to go out and start trying to, you know, get paperwork together or submit stuff to the UN. You know, the reality of the UN and the NATO and all of that has been US run for years. The United States loves to break international law and has yet to be brought up on charges. They've murdered people all over the world. Countries have attempted to tell them, stop doing that. We're going to bring you up on charges. You're found guilty. The US, it says, fuck you, and goes on about its business. So taking it to the UN and all the rest, they imposed sanctions against Iran at in disagreement with Europe and other white countries. It said, nah, don't do that. The US did it anyway. So taking something to an international level is irrelevant. We still don't have power. It doesn't fucking matter what you want if you don't have a basis of power. And the basis of power that we have to start with, even before land, before military, before economics, is a land of culture. I mean, a position of culture, a power of culture. We have no cohesiveness. It's like you got some individuals that have done some wonderful things. And if that's the basis, if individual success is the basis for our so-called freedom or advancement or whatever, then fuck it, we're free. All three of us need to shut the fuck up, go do our jobs, and, you know, clock in, clock out, going about our lives, because we're free. By that definition, individuals, you know, we have had a so-called black president, so we're free. You know, Oprah's a billionaire, so we're free. But if we look at it from our perspective, a collective perspective, then no, we're not. And that's the direction that we have to approach this from, is how do we have that collective mentality? As long as you got billionaires that ain't doing anything to help the masses of the people, no, it's irrelevant what those individuals did. And that's the difference between African history and Black history. African history highlights and touts and builds from a collective. There's no one individual who is cited with having created a writing or agriculture or government. It's always a collective. The people of Kemet did this. The people of whatever did this. These groups of people did it, as opposed to Black history, which says, well, you know, Lewis Latimer did this thing. Oh, that's great. you know, and Daniel Hale did these things, and that's great. These are individuals. They ain't got shit to do with black people. These are individuals. That's an individual mindset, and that's a part of our inability to come together. And as long as we don't have that ability to come together, white folks, when you threaten their way of life, they will come to fuck together. Period. They will rally around, whether they're, you know, they have this illusion of the left and the right, when the reality of it is they're both on the same team, take money and kickbacks and the direction from the same groups of people. But when it comes down to it, they may fuss over Roe v. Wade and abortion and whatnot, but they all agree and have voting records that reflect that they have almost to the person voted in favor of giving Lockheed Martin, a weapons dealer, billions of dollars. They've all voted in favor of increasing the military budget constantly. So they all come together to support whatever their national interests are. We don't do that. They have a culture. We don't do that. Sisters and brothers from the continent come here and are able to do things because they have a culture, not because of us, because they have a culture that they brought with them that causes them to be cohesive and stick together. And you go Ethiopians, group of them right there, Yoruba, group of them right there, buying from their own stores, doing their own. They have a culture to build on. They have that power of self that we don't have. So any idea that the feasibility has to begin with, where are we in terms of our most basic sense of power, which is our cultural identity? We don't have that. We're scattered, we're everywhere. So that, again, the feasibility of it is zero, because we're in the law of entropy. Things move from a organized state over time. They become more disorganized unless there's some outside force that steps in and reorganizes. If you have a stack of papers on a desk, over time, that stack of paper is going to come down. It's going to fall apart. Pieces of paper are going to, wind's going to knock it off, whatever. None of that paper is going to jump back up on that desk and organize itself. It's just not going to happen. So we are moving from a state of whatever level of organization and cohesiveness, less and less and less and less, to the point it's like a bomb that goes out. Eventually it'll collapse back on itself, but we have to reach the very edges of whatever that explosion is. And I don't know that we're at those edges, getting close to those edges, seem to be close to those edges, but the reality of it is, like I said, we don't have any sense of self. And that just goes back to the things we've always talked about. It always starts from there. So again, like I said, yeah, you make it as a point on a platform or something that you mention and have a class on and make sure folks are aware and that sort of thing. But the day-to-day ins and outs, to put energy into that way down the road it's a waste of time to me.
Well, let me say this. When we talk about our local objectives that we deal with as Panthers, we have what we call define, develop, and then defend. So in essence, what we're getting at when we talk about in dealing with the 3Ds, our defend needs to always be re-implemented within defining our structure and developing our structure. So as Panthers, what we think about when we talk about defending something is being able to defend the cause, going into our mechanism structure, like what Brother E's talking about with the identity. So how do we first go back to calibrating our position and our people's awareness as it applies to the defining who we are, what we are, when we are, developing that, and then being able to defend that to a point to where as you calibrate it, you're not dealing with, like he said, as an example, the stack of papers after they them all blew off the table, but being able to maintain this from a standpoint of having a intact foundation or structure that can continually be built upon. And see, I think that's the biggest missing element of this, is that we haven't been, going like even what Psyche was saying about being forced, and he talked about being forced into a position of segregation. The deal is, because of us being forced into a position of segregation, then we were able to seize the time of the fact that our people had to think on a certain level and had to operate within a confined parameter, and then be able to say, hey, the feasibility of us establishing a nation state or a separate territory for us to operate and move on the principles of self-determination are actually feasible. So our calibration had to do with keeping our people's attention and keeping our people's grasp on the fact that we need to be in control of our own way of life. We're in a segregated position, a segregated pen. So from that standpoint, all we're lacking now is a position of power to be able to claim this land and claim this ability as our own versus dealing with it from a position of being forced to. So you take that operation of working behind enemy lines or working from a position of containment, and you turn that into a position of power. So season of time, as well as what we asked for, again, like I said, the way I looked at it is we were dealing with a segregated society. So as we built up our quote unquote power base, which had to do with how we operated in the community, we were defining who we were and we were developing an operation, but we was doing it based upon being in a segregated position. But we were seeking equality, and we were seeking, I would say, we wasn't seeking separation. We were seeking to get away from separation. So our equality had to do with us being able to assimilate within a society. So I think what happened is we got lost in a storm of fighting for our rights and not respecting the aspect of what segregation brought us into. What y'all think about that aspect?
Well, I'm gonna say this, and it might not necessarily be to that point, but I think it applies that, and this is for essentially for revolutionaries, for those who wish to make changes in the community on whatever level that they see that change as being a feasible alternative, whether these people or whether these groups of people consider themselves cultural nationalists, black nationalists, whatever. It's important to understand, and E kind of touched on it a little bit. I mean, we all have, it's important to understand, as E was saying earlier, it doesn't matter what any group of people want if you don't have the power to enforce that desire. And Huey once said, said that you need to have at least one of three things in order to have political power. He said that you need to have feudal power, which is land, economic power, which is not just money, but resources, the control of resources, and military power. And he broke that down to mean people power. Basically what E was talking about that cohesiveness. And the foundation of any of those, of any of those three, was that ability to have that cohesiveness. In a book that I read called Who Are We by Dr. Kirk Harrod, he pointed out that one of the most important things for any group of people's survival and overall successful accomplishment in this world was culture. It was that culture that was that tie to bind, and brought cohesiveness to that group of people and allowed them to gain any kind of inroads that they gained in this world, period, point blank. And he said, if you doubt that, just take a look at two groups of people whose culture was basically eradicated. And the examples he used was Native Americans and African Americans, the two groups of people whose culture was essentially eradicated. So one of the things that revolutionaries have to understand is they have to go back to the groundwork and understand what basis to build on in order to move the people toward acquiring power in this society, so that these type of conversations can be more feasible. And that's just my thoughts on that. I think that's very important, that revolutionaries have to go back to the drawing board and look at things like this. Because when you go to talking conversations, when you go to the average person in the streets and go to talking a black nationalist conversation, they don't know what the hell you're talking about. When you go to the average person in the street and go to talking a cultural nationalist conversation, they don't know what the hell you're talking about. They don't understand that. And so you have to go back to the groundwork and rebuild that paradigm in people's minds of culture, even if that's feasible. And maybe that's another conversation, if rebuilding positive culture amongst the people is feasible.
I don't remember what your question was, or you said a whole lot of stuff. 10 words or less.
But basically going into define, develop, and then defending, when we were forced through segregation to how to operate, how we didn't seize the time. What I was saying, we didn't seize the time in perspective to building our power. It's like what Psyche was saying with dealing with the three different concepts of power. We had people power, but our people power was based on being in a segregated position. So what I was getting at is seizing the time of the condition that we were in, but recognizing the fact that what happened was we asked for something that actually undid our position of power, not recognizing that it undid the position of power. So are we able to go back and revisit that from the stance of being in a forced position of needing to develop who we are, and at that point being able to define and then defend it now that we know what it means to be in that position?
Well, we had a cohesiveness in that situation secondarily because we were forced to be in it. When we came here, we had a position of cohesiveness, even though we were stuck with, forced to take these long ship rides with folks who didn't speak our language. We still communicated enough with one another and identified enough with one another to launch rebellions on the slavers' ships. And even when we got here throughout the so-called slave days, there was a sense of cohesiveness that we brought with us because we still identified. We heard, generations came up with hearing sisters and brothers from the continent speaking our own language, telling our own stories about, I was the son of a prince, or, I remember seeing the prince in my village, my town, or whatever over the years. So we had that cohesiveness that has always existed. But what's happened is that cohesiveness that still exists, but we don't cling to it. We don't profit from it. We don't see any value in it because it's not about making money. In fact, our cohesiveness pulls us away from the money-making venture. And for me, the way to get there is to simply go back. You reverse the process. You begin, and I'm not saying kick adults to the curb, but you begin by instilling it in the youth, in the children. The children are open to it. The children love it. The children will soak it up. This has been, one of the reasons in the past. I don't know if y'all, well, Psyche, you were on vacation. So, we had this thing called me and a couple other cats, Brother Gary and them, had this organization called the Community for Black Liberation, and we had a school called the Dogon Family Tree, the DFT. So our emphasis was on, it was a Saturday school, our emphasis was on teaching the children and infusing them with the proper perspectives and the cultural background and the history of our people so that they take it up into the next generation. Adults, young adults, those who want to jump on board, again, continues to be my position. That's cool, work with them. The ones that don't, fuck them. I mean, that's just the way it is. We confuse saving the people with saving the people. There's no way the masses of the people, all of these millions of people are going to jump on board and let's go. It's just not going to happen. But if we take what it is we know and infuse that into generations going forward, and we do that enough, and we do that strongly enough and consistently enough, eventually, because those adult mentalities are, even without our input, just the nature of capitalism and enslavement and all of that, are eventually going to kill themselves off. That it's just like capitalism feeds on a constant want. It has to create a constant want in a society. The market has to grow and grow and grow and continue to grow in order for capitalism to function. Well, the earth is a finite entity. There's only so big that it can grow before it starts feeding on itself and destroys itself. And so is this mentality. As we bleed up into it and become a part of it and lose ourselves in it, the masses of the people are going to burn out right along with it. And that's a position that I've held for a while, is that we're not going to have to do anything to this country. We're not going to be the ones that's going to say, okay, let's go and let's fight these folks and revolt. No, this country is going to burn itself out. It's going to eat itself alive. There are going to be other groups of people that push that, because black folk in mass are not going to do it. And when that time comes, when there's an opportunity, if we've done our work and instilled in generationally after generation, this mindset, when that space opens up, you'll have an entire generation, entire groups of African people who have come up as youths being taught about a history who are not going to stand for the bullshit and push even more that mindset to the side. So it's nothing that we have to make happen. We have to recognize that it's gonna happen. No country, no empire stands forever. So as it burns itself out, we place ourselves like chess in a position and wait for them to mess up, so that when there's a vacuum, when there's a void created and we have this space to operate in, we're able to do it. We're able to deploy our people, we're able to deploy the mindset and put ourselves in positions that we've been waiting for. You know, like I said, we're not gonna make it change. We're not gonna, I don't care how many guns NFAC has, they're setting themselves up for the fall. You know, these cats and cats that are still doing that same shit, walking around with rifles and shit, has nothing to do with your liberation. Nothing. You're setting yourself up. You need to go watch the Panther movie, not the Black Panther that just came out, but the movie's about the Panther Party. At least watch the damn movie so that you can see what happens when black folks get a bunch of guns and start talking shit. It happened then, it can happen again. We're never gonna outgun these people. They own fucking Lockheed, the biggest weapons manufacturer in the world. How are you gonna outgun that? That make no sense. Your power does not come through any of that. The power comes through the culture that we're able to infuse in the younger generations. Even if it's set up a situation, young folks with kids love to go out and kick it. So you set up a Saturday, Sunday school situation so that they can come off and go and kick it and have fun. Meanwhile, you got their kids teaching them all the things that they need to know to move forward. Unbeknownst to their parents, they're getting some black pride, they're getting some African awareness, they're finding out how to become unapologetically African. They stop rebelling against the Africanity and they take that with them into their homes. They take that and cause the confusion. Yeah, they're not gonna be able to practice it every day at home, but you've laid those seeds, you've laid those bombs so that as they grow older and become adults, they're less susceptible to taking, to buying into the bullshit. You know, and I love to use my own children as an example. Rashida ain't strung out on nobody's drug. Rashida does not have children running around. Rashida she's not in the most glorious position I would love to see her in, but certainly she's not one of those just regular cats out on the street that she could have been had she not been exposed to the things that she was able to be exposed to. So even that little bit of a turn around the corner, around the curve, and duplicating that sense of self-preservation, having seen what, you know, our parents went through. I don't want to go through that shit. Let me put this off until later. Let me make some other decisions. And having that, at least that much wherewithal generationally, will begin to build us into a more proper direction than what it is we're doing now. So like I said, we don't have to try to make it happen. We have to prepare for when it happens, because it's going to fucking happen. We are not that powerful that we can make it happen. Stop it. It's not going to happen. Stop it. We're not going to make revolution. It's not going to happen. Shit's going to happen. We need to be in a position where we can take advantage of the collapse that's on the horizon.
So let me say this, and see what Psyche jumps in on this. When I hear what E says, basically, I fashion that to what we should be doing is building the ark. Think of it like that. So in building the ark so that we can take and seize the opportunity, we need our ark, our quote unquote ark of self-determination needs to be about the physical, mental, and spiritual change necessary so that when this situation comes, when this fall, inedible fall does happen, we are already in place to be able to take our people where they need to go. Is that in essence what we're saying?
Sounds like it. But I mean, yeah, sounds like it. I agree 100% with E from the perspective of you deal with the children, you deal with the youth, as he just said. We understand, because we've been doing this a long time, that you're not gonna change a mass majority of the adults. It's just not gonna happen. Adults easily get stuck in their ways, and sometimes it's just ego where an adult refuses to accept that they have been wrong about something for so long. I mean, there are religious systems that these people are tied to. There are Eurocentric cultural ideas that these people are tied to. But if you start teaching and educating and building the children, that's really how you change the community. I agree 100% with that, and that is the art. Even George Jackson talked about it in Blood in My Eye. He talked about it when he said, if I was truly trying to make some type of revolution in this country, he essentially said that what I would do is create a community center and start teaching the children, the youth. He said that I would teach them, I would, under the guise of a self-defense and physical fitness, I would teach them defense under attack. He would be basically training them in military techniques, tactics, teaching them culture, education, things like this. He said that would be the things that he would be doing to try to make those change. Even Clarence 13X in New York, one of his sayings was the babies are the greatest. So the changes occur with the children. Even the Panther Party in the 60s bumped across that idea. See, the Panther Party became an extreme threat when they bumped into the ideal of the free breakfast for children program. When they was having no children coming through and was getting no Panther lessons, that's when the Panther Party became a problem. That's when it really became a problem. As long as they were just marching with guns, all that was threatening. That was looked at tough. But when they started educating the children, that's when the real that's when it became a serious problem. And they bumped into that ideal and saw how powerful that ideal was, because through that, you are able to change the community by those who have actually become the quote unquote leaders of the community, the children themselves. So I agree 100% with that idea. And the arc, as you called it. I didn't know anything about this Dogen class y'all had. What uh give me some just quick, not in war style breakdown, uh, but a quick understanding of that. I know about that.
We were trying to, it was me, Gary, Lynn, and I think those were really just the three of us were attempting to begin replicating essentially what OBU had done. And so, like I said, it was the Dogon family tree. Rashid and Tahimba were in there. Um, and a couple of other parents. She had about 5 or 6 children who would meet on Saturdays, and we would have, the usual class lectures and conversations and that sort of thing, help with your schoolwork, tutoring type of situation. And then Gary's mother actually wrote plays. One of them was about Malcolm X, that the children would learn all the parts and then perform for the community. And we had 2 or 3 community performances that went over really, really well. The people really enjoyed it. And I'm proud to say Tahimba performed as Malcolm when we did that particular play. So I was kind of prideful and kind of arrogant about that, but it's okay. We would have, food at the events and that sort of thing. And all of the children made some lasting relationships. I think Rashida still keeps up with one of the sisters that was in the DFT. We also had the step. We weren't really good at it because all three of us, me, Gary, and Lynn, were all pretty nerdy, but we had what we could as far as the step program, at the nation with the children stepping and turning and spinning and doing all of those things. So they were learning that as well. One of the little sisters, her father was ex-military. So he was actually teaching them some maneuvers that we incorporated into being a part of the show and them coming out and kind of doing a little step march routine with it. But yeah, it wasn't anything really fancy. We never got to the level of being able to charge for it. So we basically, anything we needed, we paid for ourselves. But yeah, I mean, the program had a lot of potential, but as so many things in the community, we weren't able to keep it long term for various reasons. But yeah, Dogon family tree. I'll send you some pictures of it. Took some trips down to OBU, took the children to see OBU and explain to them and had them ask questions and be involved with the organization for that weekend that we would go down there and visit with them, so that they could see kind of what it is we were shooting for, what we were aiming toward, our feasibility investment, to instill that sort of thing within them. But yeah, I mean, and I know one of the questions that comes up is that if we're not, I guess it's taken as, okay, if we're just supposed to invest in the art, what about police brutality? What about, you know, all of these social ills that are going on, blah, 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 blah. And that's not what is being said, at least from where I'm at. It's not that you turn a blind eye to it, but the reality of it is, if the, what was that, the San Diego Black Panther Party, if they had $200,000 or $300,000 in the bank, I guarantee you they'd have a lot more clout in their neighborhoods. OBU has $200,000 in the bank, so they have some clout in the neighborhood. They can say, hey, look, something's got to change, da 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 da. Folks are going to listen because they've got some level of economic base. And one of the main ways that they've been able to do that is their school. They have a school, they have a library that the community comes and takes part in. So they're building that, exactly what it is we're saying, that arc. They have an arc. They have, and I hate you didn't get to meet Yakini and Oba. Yakini is, last I heard, on her working toward her medical, her doctorate or whatever, to be a doctor. And Oba was finishing up his was a PhD, one of them 3 or 4 levels up degrees, working with Naeem Akbar up in northern Florida. So, you know, these are their 2 first graduates that came out of their school, are hella intelligent children. And they have a very strong sense of self and of kind and identity, and are doing very, very well on an individual level. And at the same time are putting back into OBU, because that's one of the requirements. OBU pays for their schooling, and in return, they come back and work for whatever number of years in OBU to pay that off. So there's no debt that's incurred. They don't have to pay interest. They come back and give back to what they would probably want to do anyway, because it's the family that they grew up around. The teachers and the other school folks there and all of that are a community, and they're cohesive based around these cultural ideas. So on a small individual level, they're winning. You know, fuck Jay-Z, fuck LeBron and Oprah, fuck all of them. They're winning. You know, they're doing what it is we're supposed to be doing. They have a sense of culture, and thereby the economics, the land. They have the land. What was the other one?
People, military.
Military. I don't know if they have a military. We never got into that conversation, but you know, well, they have some sense of military, because one of the classes that they were required to take was either karate or it was some martial art. I forget which one it was, but that was a part of the requirement of going to the school, was that self-defense. So at the very least, they have a fundamental understanding of defending what it is you have. So they're doing exactly what the fuck we're supposed to be doing.
So that's define, develop, and defend.
That's
so
all.
I would say this. Going into building our art, to me, the element that we want to gear our listening audience to is being able to impact and get more people to participate in the construction of this art when we talk about the children. So I guess the footprint, go ahead, E.
What do you mean get more people to participate? No, fuck that. If you want to participate, let's do this. Not this appeal to, hey, we need more people to, nah, fuck that. That's the problem. We keep trying to appeal and get other people. No, do it. If you got 2 people, remember OBU, 5 people, 5 fucking people did this shit. You don't need 500 people to build shit. You just don't. You don't. We got to stop trying to save everybody. Everybody ain't gonna be saved. Whole bunch of people gonna die.
I said build people to build the art. I'm not saying. So okay, let me just go back. Let's go back to DFT.
You got 2 people in San Diego. They want to get down and really, really do the work. Those are the 2 people you need to build with. Everybody else is a babysitting opportunity. They hang on and come around when they want to. 2 people to build something. You can start a fucking daycare center with that. You can start your own whatever, a smoothie shop with that. 2 people. That's it.
So when you talk about it like that, from the standpoint of just say, let's just roll with that. When you talk about 2 people building the structure, right? Mm-hmm. And we're not using the elitist mentality. We're just talking about everyday 2 people building as much as they can build. So then you're going to save a certain percentage based upon that. if you look at, to me, when you look at it from that standpoint, and you look at the position of anything turned down, or recognizing that capitalism is going to be destroyed, then all I'm looking at it from that standpoint, that's why I go back into continuity, is attempting to reach more children and have a more of a population that will survive the onslaught.
But how do you reach them? Remember, Psyche used to tell me, conversation rules the nation. Every pimp got conversation. Every preacher got conversation. The masses of the people, one of the things I think has turned the masses of the people off of this shit is everybody got conversation. Shut the fuck up. Everybody can talk that good talk all the time. It sounds wonderful, but it's so few people doing the shit. Nobody wants to join your conversation, but they will join the fuck out of some shit that you already have built. If you have a store, a little restaurant, starts out with 2 people, and a year from now, you're making money, everything's going copacetic, guess what you get to do? You get to hire some more motherfuckers to come up in there. You go through the hiring process. Some of your questions, what do you think about the Black community? What do you think about national? Have you ever heard of national? You interview these motherfuckers. So you start to get people with some type of mindset that's on the same type of page, just like white people. White people do this shit all the time. The reason people talk about, oh, it's not a conspiracy to do this. You're right in the sense of some movie, it's not a conspiracy. But when you have a president of a company with a certain set of values, he's going to do what? He's going to hire people with similar types of attitudes and beliefs. Those people are going to turn around and hire people with similar ideas and beliefs, and on down and on down. So the guy at the top doesn't have to worry so much about the folks at the bottom, because everybody in between has been brought in because, in part, of that mindset, that mentality to accomplish the CEO's goal or the chairman's goal or whatever it is. So if we do that, 2 people turn around in a year from now, they have a business that's going all right, they start hiring people in. Okay, now you got 3 or 4 people. Your business is growing a little bit. Boom, you get to open another store. It's what fucking Mexicans do. It's what every other group does. They start out with 2 people living in a fucking house. They bring their cousins over. They pile in, put the money in, build that house up, save the money, and then they go buy some more land somewhere and then do the same thing all over again. We keep not doing that shit. And it's so fundamental. People, that stupid ass movie, build it and they will come. Build the shit and Black folk will come. Once you get to start hiring people, then you get to turn around and start offering scholarships to motherfuckers who want to go to college. What the fuck? We done fooled around and created a bona fide empire. That's an empire. This ain't an empire. This is an empire.
So in essence, you're saying let the work attract the workers. That's how I like to coin that.
Okay. Moving away from the mindset that we have to go out and say, hey, let me save you. No, we don't have to do that. Save yourself. When I see that motherfucker can swim, let me go over there and learn how to swim from this dude. He knows how to swim. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to want to make myself. Remember, what's the best way to enslave a people? Get them to ask for it. What's the best way to save a people? Get them to ask for it. Give them something to ask for. You put it out there in front of them, they're going to ask, they're going to run to you. Here I come. I want to be free too. Freedom looks like that? Shit, that's what I want. But we keep talking to motherfuckers. We keep talking. And that's part of my frustration. Everybody's fucking talking. The only ones that are doing are the ones that are running out there, setting themselves up for the fall. Running out in front of the limelight. Running out, I'm big this, and we got and all that bullshit. Instead of building something, you talk about continuity. What's more about continuity than a fucking school? What's more about continuity in a capitalist system than a business? That's continuity. Your business, was it Ford, is still around. Ford is dead, but Ford is still around. Westinghouse is dead, but Westinghouse is still around. Apple is still around. Jobs is dead. He's founded it. He started it or co-founded it. He dead, but Apple's still around. That's continuity. Continuity is not, hey, y'all, come and join us. We got this, rah, 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 rah. Everybody got a YouTube channel. Everybody got Zoom. Everybody got podcasts. Everybody got the shit. So unless we're going to compete on their terms and do some stupid bullshit that they're doing in order to get likes and subscribers and all this other bullshit, it's just conversation. We can't compete with that shit. We can't. Unless we're willing to be morons and go out there and do the dumb shit that they do, which negates everything we're talking about. So you can't, what they say, if you can't beat them, join them. Fuck that. Change the rules of the game. I refuse the rules of the game. These are my rules. This is how we're going to play it. All of those things should be superfluous. They should be, on the wings of the work that's actually going on. Post some videos of the school that we just made, of the business that we just built, of the land we just purchased, all of that shit. The people that are buying land have no concept of African people, have no concept of community. People, black folk with all the money, have no concept of the people. They can make money because they've assimilated into the society and will defend this system to their very death, but they have no concept of what it is to save the masses of people. So they give a few dollars in a scholarship here, or buy a few houses over there, or do, some charity work that they're actually probably going to write off on their taxes. So fuck that. They have no concept of, they can feed people some fish, but they can't teach them how to fish. So it's irrelevant. That's not continuity. Continuity is doing the fucking work, building the shit, so that when we're dead and gone, we leave our children more than black boots and some fucking berets. That's all I'm saying.
Shoot. That's what I'm talking about. That's the Panther 48 right there. It's like, I ain't got nothing else to say to that.
He pretty much said it. If you disagree with E, leave it in the comments. Hopefully you'll like the conversation, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Peace and power.